Carl Jung explains, these quiet signs reveal he's secretly in love. Jung's most dangerous discovery wasn't about mental illness or dreams. It was about something far more mysterious, something that happens to every man who falls deeply in love, yet remains completely invisible to his conscious mind. In his private case notes spanning 4 decades of clinical practice, Jung documented what he called Anima activation, an unconscious psychological transformation that occurs when a man's inner feminine archetype becomes constellated around a specific woman. This isn't attraction. This isn't infatuation. This is something far deeper. Jung observed that when true love strikes a man, his psyche undergoes what he termed love possession, a complete reorganization of his unconscious that creates behavioral signatures so subtle, so consistent across cultures and personality types that they operate like a secret language readable only to those who understand the hidden layers of masculine psychology. The most shocking part, these signs appear before the man himself knows he's in love. Jung wrote in his private journal, "I have witnessed the anima's power to transform even the most rational men into creatures driven by forces they cannot name, displaying behaviors they would never consciously choose, all while believing themselves to be in complete control of their emotions." Modern neuroscience confirms Jung's insights. Romantic love activates specific brain regions associated with what researchers now call neural synchronization, the unconscious mirroring and attunement that creates invisible bonds between potential lovers. But here's what Jung discovered that modern science is only beginning to understand. When a man falls into what Jung called Anima love complex, his entire energy signature changes, his voice patterns shift, his micro-expressions soften, his unconscious begins organizing itself entirely around one person. The woman becomes the center of his psychological universe, yet his ego remains completely unaware of this profound internal revolution. Jung identified 12 specific signs, behavioral markers that reveal when a man has entered this unconscious love state. These aren't the obvious romantic gestures most people expect. These are psychological signatures that emerge from the deepest layers of the masculine unconscious, signs so reliable that Jung used them to predict successful marriages decades before the couples themselves knew they were meant to be together. But Jung also discovered something darker. Men who remain unconscious of their anima activation face what he called love's shadow dangers, psychological pitfalls that can destroy not only potential relationships, but the man's sanity itself. This is the story of Jung's forbidden discovery about masculine love, the secret signs that reveal when a man's heart has been captured, even when his mind refuses to admit it, and why recognizing these signs might be the key to understanding the deepest mysteries of romantic connection. Jung identified what he called the anima love complex, a psychological condition so profound that it could completely transform a man's personality while leaving his conscious ego utterly unaware of the internal revolution taking place. This isn't ordinary attraction. This isn't casual interest or even intense infatuation. This is what Jung described as psychic constellation, a deep reorganization of the masculine psyche around the feminine archetype, triggered by encountering a woman who somehow matches the man's unconscious image of his ideal feminine. Jung wrote, "When the anima becomes activated by a specific woman, the man's entire psychological structure reorganizes itself around her presence. Yet this massive internal shift occurs entirely below the threshold of consciousness. The complex manifests through what Jung termed anima leakage, moments when the man's typically masculine presentation suddenly reveals flashes of his activated inner feminine. His voice softens when speaking her name. His gestures become more expressive when describing conversations with her. His entire energy field shifts in her presence. Yet ask him directly about his feelings, and he'll often express genuine confusion. Jung observed this phenomenon in patient after patient, successful, rational men who came to analysis complaining of mysterious anxiety, concentration problems, or inexplicable emotional volatility, never connecting these symptoms to their unconscious love activation. The ego, Jung noted, maintains its normal patterns and defenses, while the unconscious organizes itself entirely around the beloved. This creates a split that the man experiences as internal chaos without understanding its source. The condition creates what Jung called conscious-unconscious warfare. The man's rational mind continues functioning normally, making logical decisions, maintaining professional composure, following his usual routines. But his unconscious has been completely captured. His dreams fill with feminine imagery. His attention unconsciously tracks her movements in group settings. His memory records every detail of their conversations with photographic precision, while he remains consciously unaware of this selective hyperfocus. Most critically, Jung discovered that Anima love complex represents the psyche's attempt at individuation through relationship. The unconscious uses romantic love as a catalyst for integrating previously unconscious aspects of the masculine personality. The woman becomes what Jung called the anima carrier. She holds the projection of all the man's undeveloped feminine qualities: emotional depth, intuitive wisdom, creative sensitivity, nurturing capacity. But here's the danger Jung identified. If the man remains unconscious of this process, the projection becomes a prison. He begins loving his own anima reflection rather than the actual woman. The relationship becomes based on psychological possession rather than conscious connection. Jung observed, men experiencing anima love complex often feel simultaneously energized and terrified, deeply fulfilled yet profoundly vulnerable, as if their entire psychological foundation has shifted overnight. This creates the central paradox of unconscious masculine love. The very experience that could lead to the deepest psychological growth becomes a source of chaos and potential destruction when it remains hidden from conscious awareness, which is why Jung spent decades learning to recognize the signs. In 1934, Jung treated a prominent Swiss banker he codenamed Heinrich in his case notes, a man whose story perfectly illustrates the hidden power of unconscious anima activation. Heinrich was methodical, emotionally reserved, priding himself on rational decision-making and professional composure. He had built his life around predictability and control, yet he came to Jung desperate, describing inexplicable anxiety and concentration difficulties that had been growing for 6 months. "I feel as if I'm losing my mind," Heinrich told Jung, "but I can't identify any external cause." Through careful analysis, Jung discovered something Heinrich had never consciously acknowledged. He had developed what Jung termed unconscious love obsession with his secretary Greta. Heinrich consciously viewed their relationship as purely professional. When Jung suggested romantic feelings might be involved, Heinrich was genuinely shocked. "That's impossible," he insisted. "I've never thought of her that way." But Jung observed Heinrich's behavior during their sessions with clinical precision. When Heinrich discussed work situations involving Greta, his typically controlled demeanor would soften. His voice would unconsciously mirror her speech patterns when quoting their conversations, adopting her slight Austrian accent, matching her rhythmic pauses. Heinrich would unconsciously adjust his appearance on days when he knew he would see her, choosing ties that complemented colors she had worn, ensuring his hair was perfectly arranged, straightening his posture when her name appeared on his schedule. Most remarkably, Heinrich began displaying what Jung called Anima gestures, subtle feminine mannerisms that would emerge when he spoke about Greta. His hand movements became more expressive. His facial expression showed emotional nuances Jung had never seen in their months of previous work. Jung noted in his case file, Heinrich's anima has been fully activated, yet his conscious ego remains in complete denial. The split is creating the anxiety he experiences. His psyche is reorganizing around love, while his mind rejects the possibility. Heinrich's dreams provided the final confirmation. They were filled with feminine imagery, symbolic representations of union and wholeness. Mysterious women who possessed Greta's distinctive laugh. Yet Heinrich insisted these dreams meant nothing. Jung realized he was witnessing anima love complex in its purest form, complete unconscious reorganization around a beloved with total conscious denial. The breakthrough came during their 8th session. Jung asked Heinrich to describe in detail what made an effective secretary. As Heinrich spoke about Greta's qualities, her intuitive understanding of his needs, her calming presence during stressful periods, her ability to anticipate his thoughts, Jung watched his patient's entire physiology change. Heinrich's breathing deepened, his voice grew tender, his eyes took on a distant, almost dreamy quality. "Heinrich," Jung said gently, "listen to how you're speaking about her." For the first time, Heinrich heard his own voice speaking about Greta. The tone he used when describing her organizational skills was the same tone other men used when speaking about their wives. The recognition hit like lightning. Heinrich's carefully constructed rational world crumbled as he finally acknowledged what his unconscious had known for months. He was deeply, helplessly in love. "My God," Heinrich whispered, "how did I not see it?" Jung smiled. "The anima," he explained, "always knows before the ego is ready to admit it." Heinrich's integration of this recognition took another year of analysis, but once he could consciously acknowledge his love, his anxiety disappeared. His concentration returned. He eventually found the courage to express his feelings to Greta. They married 2 years later. Jung followed their relationship for over a decade, a partnership he described as one of the most psychologically integrated marriages he had ever observed. Heinrich had learned to love consciously, and in doing so, he had accessed parts of himself, emotional depth, intuitive connection, creative expression, that had been locked away behind his masculine persona for decades. The unconscious lover had become a conscious man. Contemporary neuroscience and psychology research validates every aspect of Jung's observations about unconscious love indicators, revealing the biological mechanisms behind what Jung called anima activation. Brain imaging studies show that romantic love literally rewires neural networks. When a man falls in love, his brain begins producing increased levels of dopamine, norepinephrine, and phenylethylamine, creating the same neurochemical signature found in addictive behaviors. But here's what Jung predicted decades before modern science confirmed it. These neurochemical changes occur before conscious recognition of romantic feelings. Dr. Helen Fisher's research at Rutgers University demonstrates that romantic love activates the brain's reward system in ways that create unconscious behavioral changes. The anterior cingulate cortex, responsible for attention and focus, shows heightened activity when lovers simply hear their beloved's name, even when they're not consciously thinking romantic thoughts. This explains Heinrich's unconscious focus on every detail of Greta's preferences, stories, and experiences. His brain had already identified her as romantically significant, even while his conscious mind maintained professional boundaries. Research on unconscious mimicry confirms Jung's observations about voice mirroring and gesture matching. Studies show that people unconsciously adopt the speech patterns, posture, and micro-expressions of those they're attracted to, often before becoming consciously aware of their romantic feelings. Neuroscientist Dr. Mauricio Delgado's work on autonomic nervous system responses reveals that romantic interest creates measurable changes in heart rate, pupil dilation, and stress hormone levels that occur independently of conscious intention. Men in love show increased activity in the caudate nucleus, the brain region associated with reward recognition and goal-directed behavior. This creates what researchers call intrusive thinking, the unconscious mental rehearsal of interactions with the beloved that Jung observed in Heinrich's detailed memory of conversations with Greta. Perhaps most remarkably, research on neural synchronization confirms Jung's insight about psychic connection between lovers. Studies using EEG monitoring show that romantic partners' brainwaves literally synchronize during meaningful interactions. Dr. Mauricio Delgado explains, when two people are forming a romantic bond, their brains begin operating in coordinated patterns. They unconsciously mirror each other's emotional states, attention patterns, and even breathing rhythms. This biological attunement manifests in the behavioral synchronization Jung called unconscious choreography. The way Heinrich's body would unconsciously orient toward Greta in group settings, creating subtle physical alignment without conscious intention. Studies on facial expression analysis demonstrate that micro-expressions of love and attraction appear 3 to 7 seconds before conscious recognition of romantic feelings. Advanced emotion recognition software can now identify romantic interest with 89% accuracy, based solely on unconscious facial muscle movements. Research on pheromones and chemical communication shows that romantic attraction creates subtle changes in body chemistry that influence behavior patterns and energy levels around specific individuals, explaining the energy shift Jung observed when men were in their beloved's presence. Dr. Stephanie Ortig's neuroimaging research reveals that falling in love activates 12 different brain regions simultaneously, creating what she calls a whole brain phenomenon that affects cognitive, emotional, and motivational systems. This explains why Heinrich experienced his love activation as total system disruption, anxiety, concentration problems, emotional volatility, rather than localized romantic feelings. Modern attachment theory validates Jung's insights about anima projection. Research shows that romantic love involves unconscious projection of idealized qualities onto partners, while simultaneously activating previously dormant neural pathways associated with nurturing, empathy, and emotional expression. Studies on relationship longevity confirm Jung's observations about conscious versus unconscious love patterns. Couples who demonstrate what researchers call conscious behavioral synchronization, the automatic attunement and mirroring patterns Jung identified as signs of genuine anima activation, show significantly higher relationship satisfaction and stability over time. The most cutting-edge research involves what scientists call interpersonal neural synchronization, the phenomenon where romantic partners' brains begin operating as interconnected systems, sharing information below the threshold of consciousness. This biological foundation explains every unconscious sign Jung identified: the voice mirroring, protective attention, selective memory, energy coordination, gesture matching, and emotional attunement that reveal when a man's psyche has been captured by love. Modern science hasn't disproven Jung's observations about anima activation. It has simply revealed the neurobiological mechanisms that make his psychological insights possible. Jung spent 4 decades cataloging the specific unconscious behaviors that reveal when a man has entered anima love complex. These 12 signs emerged consistently across cultures, personality types, and historical periods, psychological signatures that operate independently of conscious intention or cultural conditioning. Sign 1. The voice mirror. When a man's anima becomes activated, his voice unconsciously begins matching her vocal patterns, speech rhythms, and even subtle accent variations. Jung observed this phenomenon in patient after patient, rational men who would unknowingly adopt their beloved's distinctive speaking style when discussing conversations with her. This isn't conscious mimicry, it's unconscious neurological attunement. His brain begins coordinating with her communication patterns at a level so deep that he remains completely unaware of the vocal transformation. Heinrich adopted Greta's Austrian accent inflections. Jung's patient Wilhelm began using his colleague's academic speaking cadence. In every case, the vocal mirroring appeared months before conscious recognition of romantic feelings. Sign 2. The protective glance. His eyes unconsciously track her safety and comfort in group settings with an intensity he doesn't display toward others. Jung noticed this pattern during group therapy sessions, how men in unconscious love would scan environments for potential threats or sources of discomfort that might affect their beloved. This isn't obvious staring or romantic gazing, it's survival-level vigilance operating below conscious awareness. His nervous system begins treating her well-being as essential to his own psychological equilibrium. Jung wrote, "The man's attention becomes a protective force field around the woman, monitoring threats and opportunities for her comfort with the precision of a bodyguard. Yet he would be genuinely surprised if someone pointed out his vigilant behavior." Sign 3. The memory archive. He remembers minute details about her preferences, stories, and experiences with unusual accuracy, even when consciously claiming not to pay special attention. Jung tested this phenomenon repeatedly. Men who could barely remember their own appointments would recall specific details about their beloved's childhood memories, favorite books, or passing comments made weeks earlier. This selective hypermemory occurs because his unconscious has identified her as psychologically significant. His brain begins storing information about her with the same priority it reserves for survival-relevant data. Jung observed, the anima-activated man becomes a living archive of everything related to his beloved, yet remains consciously unaware of his extraordinary attentiveness to her details. Sign 4. The energy shift. His overall energy and mood subtly elevate in her presence or when discussing her, while becoming slightly deflated when she's absent. Jung monitored this pattern through careful observation of posture, vocal energy, and facial animation across different social contexts. This isn't dramatic mood swinging, it's subtle energetic coordination. His nervous system begins regulating itself in relationship to her proximity and availability. Modern research confirms this as interpersonal energy synchronization. Romantic partners' stress hormones, heart rates, and even brainwave patterns begin coordinating unconsciously. Sign 5. The anima gesture. He displays uncharacteristic moments of gentleness, sensitivity, or emotional expressiveness when interacting with her, as his inner feminine archetype briefly emerges through his typically masculine presentation. Jung was particularly fascinated by this phenomenon, watching traditionally stoic men reveal flashes of tender vulnerability, creative sensitivity, or nurturing behavior that seemed to come from unknown aspects of their personality. These weren't conscious attempts at romantic behavior. They were spontaneous expressions of anima qualities being activated by her presence. Sign 6. The unconscious choreography. His body unconsciously orients toward her in group settings, creating subtle physical alignment and proximity-seeking behaviors that occur independently of conscious intention. Jung documented this pattern through systematic observation, how men would unconsciously angle their bodies toward their beloved, mirror her posture, and create opportunities for incidental physical proximity while believing their positioning was coincidental. This represents what modern neuroscience calls unconscious behavioral coordination, the automatic physical attunement that occurs when romantic bonds are forming. Sign 7. The concern overflow. He shows disproportionate worry or interest in her problems, challenges, or well-being compared to others in similar situations. Jung noticed how men would become deeply invested in solving difficulties for their beloved while remaining relatively unmoved by identical problems affecting other people. This selective empathy reveals unconscious pair bond formation. His nervous system begins treating her challenges as personally relevant in ways that bypass rational evaluation. Sign 8. The integration attempt. He unconsciously begins incorporating her interests, values, or perspectives into his own worldview. Jung observed men gradually adopting books, ideas, or activities connected to their beloved without consciously deciding to expand their interests. This represents what Jung called anima assimilation, the unconscious attempt to integrate qualities represented by the beloved into his own personality structure. Sign 9. The future inclusion. His language unconsciously begins, including her in future plans or hypothetical scenarios, even in casual conversation. Jung noted how men would naturally assume her presence in imagined future events while consciously maintaining that they weren't making romantic assumptions. This reveals unconscious pair bonding fantasies operating below conscious awareness. His psyche begins automatically including her in his life trajectory. Sign 10. The vulnerability leak. He reveals personal information, fears, or dreams to her that he typically keeps private, as his anima activation creates unconscious intimacy seeking beyond his normal emotional boundaries. Jung was particularly interested in this pattern because it often confused and alarmed his male patients. They would find themselves sharing deeply personal information with their beloved, then feel puzzled by their uncharacteristic openness. Sign 11. The time distortion conversations with her seemed to exist outside normal time for him, with hours passing unnoticed. Jung observed this as one of the most reliable indicators of anima constellation, the altered consciousness state that occurs when romantic projection is active. This represents what modern neuroscience calls flow state synchronization, the altered brain activity that occurs during profound interpersonal connection. Sign 12. The jealousy shadow. He displays subtle signs of discomfort or increased attention when she mentions other romantic interests or possibilities. This isn't obvious jealousy, but unconscious vigilance regarding potential rivals. Jung noted this as one of the most dangerous signs because it operates entirely below conscious awareness, creating possessive feelings the man doesn't consciously acknowledge or understand. These 12 signs operate as an unconscious language of love, behavioral markers that reveal when a man's psyche has been captured by anima activation, even when his conscious mind refuses to admit romantic feelings exist. Jung identified 5 progressive dangers that threaten men who remain unconscious of their anima activation, psychological pitfalls that can destroy not only potential relationships, but the man's sanity and individuation itself. Danger 1. Anima inflation. The man becomes so identified with the positive feelings generated by anima activation that he loses touch with reality about the relationship, creating fantasies and projections that exist entirely in his imagination. Jung observed, when the anima becomes inflated, the man begins loving his own projection rather than the actual woman. He constructs an elaborate fantasy relationship based on minimal real interaction. This creates what Jung called love delusion, the unconscious construction of imaginary intimacy and mutual connection that may bear no relationship to the woman's actual feelings or intentions. Heinrich experienced mild anima inflation during his early months of unconscious love for Greta. He began interpreting her professional courtesy as personal interest, her work-related conversations as intimate exchanges, her everyday kindness as special romantic attention directed specifically toward him. The danger escalates when the man begins making life decisions based on these fantasy projections, changing jobs to be near her, planning future scenarios that assume her reciprocation, or becoming emotionally dependent on interactions that exist primarily in his imagination. Danger 2. Shadow projection. Unable to integrate his own vulnerability and neediness around love, he begins projecting negative qualities onto the woman or perceived rivals, seeing rejection or betrayal where none exists. Jung wrote, "The man who cannot admit his own desperate need for love will begin seeing the woman as manipulative, calculating, or cruel, particularly when reality fails to match his unconscious projections." This creates paranoid relationship dynamics, where every neutral interaction becomes evidence of the woman's negative intentions or the presence of threatening rivals. Jung treated several men who had developed elaborate conspiracy theories about their beloved's motives or relationships with other men based entirely on shadow projections of their own unacknowledged romantic desperation. Danger 3. Ego dissolution. The intensity of anima activation can overwhelm masculine ego structure, leading to loss of personal identity, decision-making capacity, and individual goals as his entire sense of self becomes organized around the beloved. Jung observed men who gradually stopped pursuing their own interests, abandoned professional goals, and lost connection with male friendships as their unconscious organized entirely around the woman who had activated their anima. In extreme cases, Jung noted, the man ceases to exist as an individual and becomes merely a satellite orbiting the woman's existence, desperately attempting to maintain proximity and approval. This creates what Jung called psychological suicide, the unconscious dissolution of individual identity in service of maintaining connection to the anima carrier. Danger 4. Unconscious manipulation. Without conscious awareness of his love, he may unconsciously attempt to create intimacy or connection through indirect means, guilt, emotional manipulation, or covert contracts rather than honest vulnerability and direct communication. Jung observed how unconsciously loving men would often become what he called relationship manipulators, using favors, gifts, excessive helpfulness, or emotional guilt to create obligated connection with women who had never agreed to romantic involvement. The unconscious lover, Jung wrote, often becomes inadvertently abusive, using emotional manipulation to create the intimacy he cannot consciously acknowledge wanting. This pattern destroys authentic connection by creating relationships based on obligation and guilt, rather than mutual choice and attraction. Danger 5. Psychic possession. In extreme cases, unconscious love can create what Jung called anima possession, complete domination of conscious personality by the love complex, leading to obsessive behavior, reality distortion, and potential psychological breakdown. Jung documented several cases where men became so psychically possessed by unconscious love that they lost the capacity to function in normal reality. Their entire existence became organized around the beloved, tracking her movements, analyzing every interaction for hidden meaning, creating elaborate fantasy scenarios of union and rejection. Anima possession, Jung warned, represents the complete victory of unconscious projection over conscious reality, the man becomes psychologically indistinguishable from someone experiencing active psychosis. This level of possession often leads to stalking behavior, complete social isolation, and the total breakdown of rational thought processes. Jung observed that men who remain unconscious of their love often sabotage potential relationships through these shadow patterns, either overwhelming women with unconscious intensity or creating such internal psychological chaos that they become unable to function authentically in the beloved's presence. The most insidious danger is what Jung termed love shadow, unconscious resentment toward the woman for having caused such disruption to his previously stable psychological state. This leads to blame, punishment, and revenge fantasies directed at the innocent woman who simply happened to activate his anima projection. Jung's case files contain tragic examples of men who destroyed their own lives and traumatized innocent women through unconscious love possession. Relationships that could have led to profound growth and genuine connection if only the anima activation had been recognized and consciously integrated. The dangers escalate progressively. Inflation leads to shadow projection. Shadow projection leads to ego dissolution. Ego dissolution enables unconscious manipulation, and manipulation can culminate in complete psychic possession. Jung's solution required intervening at the first stage, developing the capacity to recognize anima activation before it progresses into these destructive patterns. Jung's solution for unconscious love involved what he called conscious anima integration, a four-stage process of recognizing, understanding, and consciously incorporating anima activation while maintaining masculine ego strength and authentic self-expression. This wasn't about suppressing romantic feelings or eliminating anima projection. It was about developing what Jung termed love consciousness, the capacity to experience profound romantic feeling while maintaining psychological sovereignty and individual identity. Stage 1. Recognition. The first stage requires brutal honesty about the signs of anima activation. Jung developed specific techniques for helping men recognize when their psyche had been captured by unconscious love. The man must learn to observe his own behavior with clinical objectivity, Jung wrote. He must notice when his voice changes, when his attention patterns shift, when his energy becomes dependent on another's presence. Jung used systematic self-observation exercises. He had patients monitor their emotional states before, during, and after interactions with specific individuals. He taught them to track their memory patterns, noting whose details they remembered with unusual accuracy. Heinrich's breakthrough came when Jung helped him recognize how differently he spoke about Greta compared to other colleagues. The vocal shift was so obvious once Heinrich became conscious of it that he couldn't believe he had missed it for months. Jung emphasized that recognition requires overcoming what he called masculine emotional amnesia, the unconscious habit of forgetting or dismissing emotional experiences to maintain ego strength. Stage 2. Differentiation. Once anima activation is recognized, the crucial work becomes separating genuine connection from projection, fantasy, and unconscious neediness. Jung wrote, "The man must learn to distinguish between the actual woman and the anima image he has projected onto her. This requires the painful recognition that much of what he believes he loves about her may exist primarily in his imagination." This stage involves systematic reality testing. Jung taught patients to examine their assumptions about the woman's feelings, intentions, and reciprocal interest. He helped them identify which of their beliefs about the relationship were based on actual evidence versus anima projections. Heinrich had to confront the reality that Greta had never shown genuine romantic interest. Most of the signs he had interpreted as personal connection were professional courtesy and workplace friendliness extended equally to other colleagues. This recognition was devastating but necessary. Only by releasing anima projections could Heinrich see Greta as an actual person rather than a fantasy carrier of his unconscious, feminine ideal. Stage 3. Integration. The third stage involves consciously incorporating the anima-activated qualities: emotional expressiveness, intuitive sensitivity, creative inspiration, into conscious personality without losing masculine identity or becoming anima-possessed. Jung called this masculine wholeness, the capacity to access traditionally feminine psychological qualities while maintaining masculine ego strength and individual identity. Heinrich discovered that his anima activation around Greta had awakened emotional depth, creative sensitivity, and intuitive understanding that had been locked away for decades. Jung helped him recognize these as gifts to be integrated rather than projections to be eliminated. The goal, Jung explained, is not to stop loving but to love consciously, to experience profound romantic feeling while maintaining individual psychological sovereignty. This required Heinrich to develop what Jung called conscious vulnerability, the capacity to feel deeply and express authentically without losing personal boundaries or becoming dependent on the woman's response. Stage 4. Expression. The final stage involves communicating authentic feelings directly and honestly, while maintaining the capacity to accept all possible outcomes, including rejection or non-reciprocation. Jung taught that conscious love expression requires what he called individuated courage, the willingness to be emotionally open while maintaining inner strength and psychological independence. Heinrich's expression to Greta was a masterpiece of conscious vulnerability. He acknowledged his genuine feelings while making clear that he had no expectations of reciprocation. He expressed appreciation for their professional relationship while being honest about his romantic interest. Greta was initially surprised but ultimately moved by Heinrich's authentic honesty. Their relationship evolved slowly into genuine mutual attraction based on reality rather than projection. Jung noted, conscious love expression creates space for authentic connection because it's based on truth rather than manipulation, vulnerability rather than neediness, and individual strength rather than desperate dependency. The integration process created what Jung called the conscious masculine lover, a man capable of profound romantic feeling while maintaining psychological wholeness and authentic self-expression. Jung emphasized that this wasn't a one-time achievement, but an ongoing practice. Anima activation would continue throughout life, requiring constant vigilance against unconscious projection and persistent commitment to conscious integration. But the rewards, Jung observed, were profound. Men who learned to love consciously became capable of relationships that supported mutual individuation rather than psychological dependency, partnerships that enhanced both partners' individual development while creating genuine intimacy based on truth rather than projection. Jung's solution transformed curse into gift, possession into consciousness, and desperate need into conscious choice. Jung studied historical figures throughout his career, analyzing how different men had handled anima activation and unconscious love. His research revealed stark contrasts between those who achieved conscious integration and those who became psychologically possessed or destroyed by unconscious romantic projections. Success case: Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. Jung considered Goethe one of history's finest examples of conscious anima integration through romantic love. Throughout his life, Goethe experienced intense romantic attachments that activated his anima, from his early love for Friederike Briand to his profound connection with Charlotte von Stein to his later marriage to Christian Vulpius. Jung wrote, Goethe demonstrated the capacity to use anima activation as fuel for individuation rather than becoming possessed by romantic projection. Each love relationship awakened different aspects of his creative and emotional potential. Rather than becoming obsessed or losing himself in romantic fantasy, Goethe channeled his anima activation into literary creativity. His novel The Sorrows of Young Werther emerged from his unrequited love for Charlotte Buff, but instead of remaining trapped in romantic suffering, he transformed the experience into art that helped him integrate his emotional depth. Jung observed, Goethe loved many women throughout his life, but he never lost himself in love. His relationships enhanced his individual development rather than diminishing it. Goethe's marriage to Christiane demonstrated conscious love integration. Despite social pressure to marry within his class, Goethe chose a relationship based on genuine compatibility and mutual affection. He maintained his individual creative pursuits while creating a partnership that supported both partners' growth. Failure case. Oscar Wilde. Jung analyzed Oscar Wilde as a tragic example of how unconscious anima activation can lead to complete psychological destruction. Wilde's relationship with Lord Alfred Douglas demonstrated what Jung called anima possession, leading to social and psychological suicide. Jung noted, Wilde became so identified with his anima projection onto Douglas that he lost all capacity for rational self-preservation. His unconscious love became more important to him than his career, reputation, family, or freedom. Wilde's letters to Douglas reveal classic signs of anima possession: complete idealization of the beloved, inability to see Douglas's actual character flaws, and willingness to sacrifice everything for proximity to his romantic projection. The relationship destroyed Wilde's career, family, and social position. Jung observed, Wilde chose anima possession over conscious integration, and the result was psychological and social annihilation. Even after imprisonment and exile, Wilde remained psychologically possessed by Douglas, unable to recognize how his unconscious projections had created the entire catastrophe. Success case. Carl Jung's marriage. Jung's own relationship with Emma served as a laboratory for conscious anima integration. Jung was honest about the challenges. His attraction to Sabine Spielrein had nearly destroyed his marriage and professional reputation through unconscious anima activation. Jung wrote in his memoir, I had to learn the difficult lesson of loving Emma as she actually was, rather than as a carrier for my anima projections. This required constant consciousness about my own unconscious processes. Jung and Emma developed what he called conscious partnership, a relationship that supported both partners' individuation while maintaining genuine intimacy. Emma became a respected analyst in her own right, pursuing her own intellectual interests while maintaining their emotional connection. Jung observed, our marriage succeeded because we both committed to conscious development rather than unconscious fusion. We learned to love each other's actual personalities rather than our projected ideals. Failure case. Dante and Beatrice. Jung analyzed Dante's idealization of Beatrice as a classic example of anima inflation, preventing authentic relationship. Dante encountered Beatrice only a few times in his life, yet she became the organizing principle of his entire creative output. Jung wrote, Dante created magnificent poetry through his anima projection onto Beatrice, but he never achieved actual relationship with a real woman. His love remained entirely in the realm of fantasy and projection. Dante's Divine Comedy represents the pinnacle of anima projection, transformed into art, but Jung noted the psychological cost. Dante never learned to love an actual woman. His marriage to Gemma Donati was reportedly distant and unhappy, because he remained psychologically possessed by his idealized image of Beatrice. Jung observed, Dante's genius lay in his ability to create beauty from anima projection, but his tragedy lay in never integrating this activation into conscious relationship with a living woman. Success case. Victor Hugo Jung studied Hugo's relationship with Juliette Drouet as an example of conscious anima integration within a complex life situation. Despite being married to Adele, Hugo developed a profound romantic relationship with Juliette that lasted 50 years. Jung noted, Hugo demonstrated that conscious anima integration can create authentic love relationships that endure precisely because they're based on reality rather than projection. Hugo's letters to Juliette reveal conscious romantic love, appreciation for her actual qualities, awareness of her human flaws, and commitment to supporting her individual development. Their relationship enhanced both partners' lives without creating possession or fantasy-based dependency. Failure case. F. Scott Fitzgerald. Jung analyzed Fitzgerald's relationship with Zelda as a devastating example of mutual anima-animus possession leading to psychological destruction for both partners. Jung wrote, Fitzgerald and Zelda became so identified with their romantic projections of each other that they lost all individual identity. Their relationship became a folie à deux, shared madness masquerading as great love. Fitzgerald projected his creative anima onto Zelda, seeing her as his muse and inspiration. Simultaneously, Zelda projected her achievement animus onto Scott, living vicariously through his literary success. Neither partner maintained individual psychological development. The result was mutual psychological cannibalism. As Fitzgerald's career declined, Zelda's mental health collapsed. They consumed each other through unconscious projection rather than supporting each other's individuation. Jung observed, their relationship demonstrated how unconscious love can destroy both partners when projection replaces genuine connection and individual development is sacrificed for romantic fusion. The key difference Jung identified between success and failure cases lay in consciousness versus possession. Successful lovers maintained individual identity while experiencing profound romantic connection. Failed lovers lost themselves in projection and fantasy, ultimately destroying both the relationship and their individual psychological development. Jung concluded, the capacity to love consciously, maintaining both deep feeling and individual sovereignty, represents one of the highest achievements of human psychological development. Jung's most profound insights into unconscious love emerged from his own devastating personal confrontation with anima activation, particularly his relationship with Sabina Spielrein and his near destruction of his marriage to Emma. In his Red Book entries and later self-analysis, Jung documented his experience of what he called anima storms, periods when romantic feelings created such psychological intensity that he questioned his sanity and professional judgment. Jung wrote, I found myself behaving in ways utterly foreign to my conscious personality, displaying emotional expressiveness, vulnerability, and romantic gestures that seemed to emerge from some unknown aspect of my psyche. His affair with Sabina revealed the terrifying power of unconscious anima activation. Jung, the rational scientist and respected analyst, became psychologically possessed by romantic projection. Jung's letters to Sabina, discovered decades after his death, reveal classic signs of anima possession. You have awakened something in me that I didn't know existed. I feel as if I'm discovering parts of myself through loving you that have been locked away for my entire life. Jung observed his own unconscious signs with clinical fascination, even as he experienced them. He noticed how his voice changed when speaking Sabina's name, how his memory recorded every detail of their conversations, how his energy became dependent on her presence. Most troublingly, Jung recognized how his unconscious love created what he called therapeutic boundary collapse. His role as Sabina's analyst became contaminated by romantic projection and anima possession. Jung wrote in his journal, "I have become the classic example of everything I warn against, a professional who has lost objectivity through unconscious romantic activation. I am studying my own psychological destruction in real time." The affair nearly ended Jung's marriage, destroyed his professional relationship with Freud, and threatened his entire career. Jung experienced what he called anima possession psychosis, periods where his romantic projections became more real to him than external reality. Jung's Red Book entries from this period reveal a man in complete psychological crisis. "I no longer know where Sabina ends and my anima projections begin. I am in love with my own feminine shadow, and it is driving me toward madness." Through painful self-examination, Jung realized his anima activation around Sabina represented his psyche's attempt to integrate his own feminine qualities, emotional depth, intuitive knowing, creative expression that had been suppressed in favor of rational, scientific masculinity. Jung wrote, "My love for Sabina was actually my love for my own undeveloped anima. She became the carrier for all the feminine qualities I had rejected in myself: emotional expressiveness, artistic sensitivity, intuitive wisdom." The integration process required what Jung called conscious love differentiation, learning to separate genuine caring for Sabina from projection of his own anima needs. Jung spent years in self-analysis, working to reclaim his projected anima qualities and integrate them into his conscious personality. This work became the foundation for his theories about anima animus and the individuation process. Jung's relationship with Emma also required conscious integration work. Emma had to learn to differentiate between her husband and her animus projections, while Jung had to learn to love Emma as she actually was, rather than as a carrier for his anima projections. Jung wrote, "Emma and I survived because we both committed to conscious relationship work. We learned to love each other's actual personalities rather than our unconscious projections." The marriage became what Jung called individuated partnership, a relationship that supported both partners' psychological development while maintaining genuine intimacy. Jung's personal struggles with anima activation taught him that unconscious love represents both the greatest danger and the greatest opportunity in human psychological development. Jung observed, "My anima possession around Sabina nearly destroyed my life, but it also awakened capacities for emotional depth, creative expression, and psychological understanding that became the foundation for my life's work." Jung's integration of his anima activation led to his most profound theoretical insights about love, relationships, and human psychological development. His personal suffering became the raw material for understanding that would help thousands of people integrate their own unconscious love patterns. Jung concluded, "The anima activation that nearly destroyed me ultimately became the source of my greatest contribution to human understanding. Consciousness transformed curse into gift." His later relationships with Toni Wolff and other women demonstrated conscious anima integration, deep emotional connections that enhanced rather than threatened his marriage and individual development. Jung wrote in his memoir, "I learned that it's possible to love many people consciously without losing oneself or destroying existing relationships. Conscious love multiplies rather than diminishes our capacity for authentic connection." Jung's personal journey from anima possession to conscious integration became the template for helping other men navigate the treacherous waters of unconscious love activation. Jung developed specific techniques for recognizing and consciously integrating anima activation and unconscious love patterns. These tools emerged from his clinical practice and personal experience, designed to help men develop what he called love consciousness before unconscious patterns created psychological possession or relationship destruction. Tool 1. The behavioral mirror. Jung taught patients to observe their own behavior patterns around specific individuals with clinical objectivity, noting changes that might indicate unconscious anima activation. Every morning, Jung instructed, spend 5 minutes reviewing your interactions from the previous day. Ask yourself, did my voice change when speaking with or about any particular person? Did my posture shift? Did my energy levels fluctuate based on someone's presence or absence? Jung provided specific observation categories: vocal tone and rhythm, body language and positioning, energy levels and mood shifts, attention patterns and focus, memory retention and detail recall, and emotional reactivity and concern levels. Heinrich used this technique to finally recognize his unconscious patterns around Greta. After 2 weeks of systematic self-observation, the signs became undeniable. His entire behavioral signature changed in her presence. Jung warned, "This tool requires brutal honesty. Men must resist the ego's tendency to rationalize or dismiss obvious behavioral changes. The goal is recognition, not justification." Tool 2. The memory audit. Jung developed systematic techniques for examining memory patterns to identify unconscious romantic investment. Once weekly, Jung advised, conduct a memory audit. List what you remember about different people's preferences, stories, personal details, and casual comments. Look for patterns of unusually detailed recall that might indicate unconscious prioritization. Jung observed that anima-activated men often remember minute details about their beloved while having poor recall for similar information about other people. This selective hypermemory operates entirely below conscious awareness. The technique involves creating lists. What do I remember about person A's childhood, interests, preferences, dreams? What about person B, person C? The contrast often reveals unconscious romantic investment that the conscious mind hasn't acknowledged. Jung noted, the unconscious always reveals its priorities through attention and memory patterns. Men who claim to feel nothing special for a particular woman often discover they've been unconsciously cataloging every detail of her existence. Tool 3. The energy tracking. Jung taught systematic monitoring of emotional and physical energy levels before, during, and after interactions with specific individuals. Create an energy log, Jung instructed. Rate your energy level from 1 to 10 before seeing particular people, during interactions, and afterward. Pattern recognition will reveal unconscious emotional regulation tied to specific individuals. Men experiencing anima activation typically show elevated energy in the beloved's presence and deflation during absence. This energy coordination occurs independently of conscious romantic recognition. Jung provided tracking categories: overall vitality and alertness, emotional positivity and optimism, creative inspiration and motivation, physical energy and stamina, and mental clarity and focus. Heinrich discovered that his energy rating spiked to 8-10 during workdays when he knew he'd see Greta, while dropping to 4-5 on weekends or her vacation days. The pattern was so consistent it functioned like a biological barometer of her proximity. Tool 4. The projection screen. Jung developed techniques for examining thoughts and fantasies about specific individuals to identify anima projection versus genuine connection. Weekly, examine your thoughts about people you interact with regularly, Jung advised. Ask yourself, am I seeing their actual qualities, or am I projecting idealized images onto them? What evidence supports my beliefs about their personality, feelings, or intentions toward me? Jung taught systematic reality testing. What specific behaviors support my beliefs about this person? What evidence contradicts my assumptions? What am I assuming about their thoughts or feelings without direct confirmation? How much of my interest is based on actual interaction versus imagination? This tool helps differentiate between genuine compatibility and anima projection. Jung noted, most unconscious love is actually love of one's own projected anima. The woman becomes a blank screen for the man's unconscious feminine idealization. Tool 5. The Future Fantasy Audit. Jung taught examination of daydreams and future planning to identify unconscious pair bonding desires. Monitor your spontaneous fantasies and future plans, Jung instructed. Notice how often particular individuals appear in your imagined scenarios. This reveals unconscious integration and pairing desires operating below conscious awareness. The technique involves tracking spontaneous daydreams and their recurring characters, future plans and assumed participants, hypothetical scenarios and their cast of characters, and problem-solving fantasies and their imagined supporters. Jung observed, the unconscious always includes the anima carrier in future planning, even when the conscious mind claims no romantic interest. Fantasy reveals the psyche's true intentions. Tool 6. The Anima Gesture Recognition. Jung taught men to recognize moments when typically masculine presentation reveals flashes of activated feminine qualities. Pay attention to uncharacteristic emotional expressiveness, gentleness, or sensitivity, Jung advised. Note when these qualities emerge and in whose presence. Anima activation often manifests through temporary personality shifts that reveal unconscious romantic feeling. Jung provided specific indicators, softer vocal tones or more expressive speech, increased emotional openness or vulnerability, more nurturing or protective behaviors, enhanced aesthetic sensitivity or creative expression, and greater intuitive understanding or empathy. Heinrich noticed he became uncharacteristically gentle and emotionally expressive when discussing work challenges with Greta, revealing aspects of his personality that remained hidden in other professional relationships. Tool 7. The Concern Calibration. Jung developed techniques for comparing levels of worry and investment across different relationships to identify unconscious romantic involvement. Systematically compare your emotional investment in different people's problems and well-being, Jung instructed. Disproportionate concern often indicates unconscious anima activation. The technique involves creating comparison charts. How much do I worry about person A's challenges versus person B's identical problems? How invested am I in different people's success or happiness? How much emotional energy do I spend on various relationships? Jung noted, unconscious love reveals itself through selective empathy. Men often discover they're deeply invested in their beloved's well-being while remaining relatively unmoved by similar challenges affecting other people. Tool 8. The Dream Analysis. Jung taught systematic recording and analysis of dreams for anima activation indicators. Keep a dream journal, Jung advised. Look for recurring feminine figures, romantic imagery, symbols of union or wholeness, and emotional themes related to love or partnership. Dreams often reveal unconscious romantic activation before conscious recognition. Jung provided analysis categories, recurring dream characters and their relationship to real people, romantic or sexual imagery and its emotional tone, symbols of union, marriage, or partnership, and feminine figures and their qualities or actions. Dreams often feature the beloved in symbolic rather than literal form, as anonymous women with her distinctive qualities or in scenarios representing union and emotional connection. Jung emphasized, these tools require consistent practice and honest self-observation. The goal is developing conscious awareness of unconscious patterns, creating the foundation for authentic choice rather than psychological possession. Regular use of these techniques creates what Jung called love consciousness, the capacity to recognize anima activation early and choose conscious integration rather than unconscious possession. Jung mapped 5 developmental stages in the transformation from unconscious anima activation to conscious integrated love. This arc represents what Jung considered one of the most profound individuation journeys available to men, the evolution from psychological possession to conscious choice in romantic love. Stage 1. Unconscious activation. The anima becomes constellated around a specific individual, creating behavioral changes and emotional intensity that the man doesn't consciously recognize or understand. Jung noted this stage typically lasts 3 to 6 months and involves the 12 unconscious signs he documented. Jung wrote, the man's entire psychological structure reorganizes around the beloved, yet this massive internal shift occurs entirely below conscious awareness. He experiences inexplicable mood changes, anxiety, or emotional volatility without connecting these symptoms to romantic activation. Heinrich exemplified this stage perfectly. His mysterious anxiety, concentration problems, and emotional instability all stemmed from unconscious anima activation around Greta, yet he remained completely unaware of any romantic feelings. Jung observed that men in this stage often seek help for seemingly unrelated problems. Work stress, sleep difficulties, general anxiety, or relationship issues with other people. They rarely connect their symptoms to unconscious romantic activation. The key indicator of stage 1 is the presence of Jung's 12 unconscious signs without any conscious recognition of romantic feelings. The man's behavior reveals anima activation while his mind maintains complete denial. Stage 2. Recognition crisis. Beginning to consciously acknowledge romantic feelings creates psychological crisis, as the ego confronts the vulnerability and potential rejection inherent in love. Jung noted this as often the most psychologically destabilizing stage. Jung wrote, the transition from unconscious to conscious love triggers what I call anima shock, the sudden recognition that one's entire psychological equilibrium has been dependent on someone who may not reciprocate these feelings. This stage involves intense psychological conflict between the ego's need for control and the anima's demand for emotional vulnerability. Men often experience panic, depression, or desperate attempts to return to unconscious denial. Heinrich's recognition crisis lasted several weeks. Once he acknowledged his love for Greta, he became terrified of losing her professional regard, convinced she would find his feelings inappropriate or disturbing. Jung observed that many men cycle repeatedly between stages 1 and 2, acknowledging their feelings briefly before retreating into unconscious denial when the emotional intensity becomes overwhelming. The key work of stage 2 involves accepting the reality of romantic feelings without being overwhelmed by vulnerability or the fear of rejection. Stage 3. Integration struggle. Learning to hold romantic feelings consciously without being overwhelmed or possessed by them requires developing what Jung called masculine vulnerability, the capacity to love openly while maintaining individual strength and identity. Jung wrote, the man must learn to experience profound romantic feeling while maintaining psychological sovereignty. This requires integrating anima-activated qualities, emotional depth, sensitivity, creative expression, without losing masculine ego strength. This stage involves practical work, learning to feel deeply without becoming dependent, expressing emotions without losing personal boundaries, and maintaining individual goals while acknowledging relationship desires. Heinrich's integration struggle involved learning to appreciate Greta as a real person rather than an anima projection. This required releasing his idealized fantasies while maintaining genuine appreciation for her actual qualities. Jung noted that stage 3 often involves temporary periods of depression or disillusionment as the man releases romantic projections and confronts the difference between fantasy and reality. The key achievement of stage 3 is developing what Jung called conscious emotional capacity, the ability to feel romantic love without being psychologically possessed by it. Stage 4. Differentiation mastery, separating genuine love from anima projection, involves learning to see and love the actual person rather than idealized fantasy, while integrating activated anima qualities into conscious personality. Jung wrote, "The man achieves the capacity to love the woman as she actually is, rather than as a carrier for his unconscious feminine ideal. Simultaneously, he integrates the anima qualities she activated into his own conscious personality." This stage represents profound psychological maturation. The man develops his own emotional expressiveness, creative sensitivity, and intuitive understanding rather than seeking these qualities through romantic projection. Heinrich reached differentiation mastery when he could appreciate Greta's genuine qualities while no longer needing her to carry his anima projections. He had developed his own emotional depth and creative expression. Jung observed that men who achieve stage 4 often become significantly more attractive to women because they offer genuine individual development rather than needy projection seeking. The key indicator of stage 4 is the capacity to love authentically while maintaining complete psychological independence. Stage 5. Conscious love expression, achieving the capacity to communicate romantic feelings directly and authentically while accepting all possible outcomes, creates what Jung termed individuated love. Deep feeling combined with psychological sovereignty. Jung wrote, "The man becomes capable of vulnerable honesty without desperate neediness, romantic expression without manipulative expectation, and deep feeling without psychological possession." Stage 5 represents the pinnacle of masculine romantic development. The man can love openly while maintaining individual identity, express feelings authentically while respecting the woman's autonomy, and create genuine intimacy while preserving personal boundaries. Heinrich's expression to Greta demonstrated stage 5 mastery. He communicated his feelings honestly while making clear he had no expectations of reciprocation. His vulnerability came from strength rather than neediness. Jung noted that relationships formed at stage 5 tend to be exceptionally healthy because they're based on conscious choice rather than unconscious projection, individual wholeness rather than mutual dependency. The ultimate goal is what Jung envisioned as conscious masculine love, deep romantic feeling that enhances rather than diminishes individual psychological development and authentic self-expression. Jung observed that each stage presents specific challenges and opportunities for growth. Many men cycle through stages multiple times as different layers of anima material surface for integration. The most critical transition occurs between stages 2 and 3, where many men either retreat into unconsciousness or become anima-possessed rather than achieving healthy integration. Jung emphasized, "Successful navigation requires what I call love courage, willingness to be vulnerable while maintaining personal boundaries and the capacity to love without possessing or controlling." Men who complete this transformation arc become what Jung considered essential for human psychological evolution, conscious lovers capable of authentic intimacy without psychological possession or projection-based dependency. Jung identified specific psychological traps that emerge during the process of transforming unconscious love into conscious integration. These pitfalls often appear precisely when men believe they've achieved conscious mastery, making recognition and avoidance crucial for successful anima integration. The anima inflation trap. After initial recognition of romantic feelings, men often become so identified with the positive emotions of anima activation that reality testing diminishes, creating unrealistic expectations and projections that inevitably lead to disappointment. Jung wrote, "The man mistakes the euphoria of anima activation for evidence of mutual romantic connection. He becomes intoxicated by his own projected feelings rather than grounding himself in actual relationship reality." This trap manifests as excessive optimism about reciprocation, over-interpretation of neutral behaviors as romantic signals, and assumption of emotional intimacy that exists primarily in imagination. Jung treated several men who had convinced themselves they were in reciprocal romantic relationships based entirely on professional courtesy, friendly conversation, and their own projected anima feelings. Warning signs include feeling certain the woman shares romantic interest without direct evidence, interpreting every interaction as confirmation of mutual connection, planning future scenarios that assume reciprocation, and inability to consider the possibility of non-romantic friendship. Jung's antidote. Regular reality testing through honest examination of actual evidence versus wishful projection. Ask yourself, what specific behaviors indicate romantic interest rather than general friendliness? The vulnerability backlash. After achieving initial consciousness about romantic feelings, men often retreat into excessive masculine defensiveness or emotional shutdown as protection against the risk of rejection or hurt. Jung observed, having tasted the terrifying vulnerability of conscious love, the ego often swings to the opposite extreme, complete emotional withdrawal and defensive rationalization. This backlash sabotages authentic connection through overprotection. The man becomes so afraid of vulnerability that he creates emotional distance precisely when openness might create genuine intimacy. Manifestations include suddenly becoming cold or distant after warm interactions, rationalizing romantic feelings as inappropriate or impractical, avoiding opportunities for deeper connection, and reverting to purely professional or casual interaction patterns. Jung noted, the vulnerability backlash often occurs just as mutual interest might be developing, creating tragic missed opportunities for authentic connection. Jung's solution: recognize vulnerability as strength rather than weakness. Conscious emotional openness balanced with appropriate boundaries creates the foundation for genuine intimacy. The confession compulsion. Once romantic feelings become conscious, men often feel pressured to immediately declare their emotions without allowing time for proper integration or consideration of timing, context, and mutual readiness. Jung wrote, "The transition from unconscious to conscious love creates internal pressure to confess feelings immediately, as if consciousness itself demands instant expression, regardless of appropriateness or timing." This compulsion often destroys potential relationships by overwhelming women with premature emotional intensity or creating awkward situations that preclude natural development of mutual interest. Warning signs include feeling urgent need to declare feelings immediately upon recognition, inability to enjoy present interactions without demanding clarity about future, romantic potential and anxiety about hiding feelings that leads to inappropriate disclosure timing. Jung's guidance: conscious love includes wisdom about timing and context, Allow feelings to mature and stabilize before expression. Create appropriate opportunities for natural relationship development. The control shadow, attempting to manage or manipulate the beloved's response to love rather than accepting the uncertainty inherent in authentic romantic expression, represents one of the most destructive pitfalls Jung identified. Jung observed, unable to tolerate the uncertainty of genuine vulnerability, men often unconsciously attempt to control outcomes through gifts, excessive helpfulness, or emotional manipulation designed to create obligated reciprocation. This shadow manifests as covert contracts, doing favors or providing support with unconscious expectations of romantic reciprocation, becoming indispensable to create dependency, or using guilt or emotional pressure to manufacture connection. Jung noted, control-based love destroys authentic relationship by replacing free choice with obligation and genuine attraction with manipulated dependency. Signs include giving gifts or help with unconscious strings attached, feeling resentful when kindness isn't reciprocated romantically, and strategic behavior designed to create emotional debt or dependency. Jung's antidote, love freely given without expectation, creates space for authentic connection. Control-based love generates resentment and destroys genuine intimacy. The anima possession relapse. Even after achieving conscious integration, men can fall back into unconscious patterns during times of stress, rejection, or romantic intensity, losing the capacity for differentiated conscious loving. Jung warned, anima integration is not a permanent achievement but an ongoing practice. Stress, rejection, or intense romantic activation can trigger regression into unconscious possession patterns. Relapse often occurs during relationship challenges, romantic rejection, or periods when the beloved shows interest in other romantic possibilities. The man reverts to projection, fantasy, and possession-based patterns. Warning signs include returning to obsessive thinking patterns, losing ability to see the woman's actual personality versus anima projections, and reverting to manipulative or controlling behaviors during relationship stress. Jung's prevention strategy: maintain ongoing self-observation and consciousness practices. Recognize that anima integration requires constant vigilance, particularly during emotionally intense periods. The perfectionism paralysis: becoming so focused on integrating anima activation correctly that spontaneity and natural romantic expression are lost in favor of psychological analysis and self-consciousness. Jung observed, some men become so preoccupied with achieving perfect conscious integration that they lose the capacity for natural, spontaneous, romantic expression. This trap creates artificial, overly analyzed interactions where psychological technique replaces authentic emotional expression. The man becomes more focused on demonstrating conscious integration than experiencing genuine connection. Manifestations include excessive self-analysis during romantic interactions, inability to be spontaneous due to fear of unconscious patterns, and treating every interaction as a psychological exercise rather than natural human connection. Jung's balance: consciousness serves authentic expression, not the reverse. Use awareness to support genuine feeling rather than replacing natural emotion with psychological technique. The projection persistence: continuing to see idealized anima qualities in the beloved even after conscious recognition, unable to separate projection from reality and love, the actual person rather than the fantasy. Jung noted, many men believe they've achieved conscious integration while remaining subtly possessed by romantic projections. They mistake slightly more conscious fantasy for genuine reality-based love. This pitfall involves maintaining anima projections, while convincing oneself that these projections represent accurate perception of the woman's actual qualities. Signs include inability to identify any flaws or limitations in the beloved, assumption that the woman possesses ideal feminine qualities without evidence, and resistance to information that contradicts idealized perceptions. Jung's reality check, regular examination of what you actually know about the person versus what you're assuming or projecting. Love based on projection ultimately fails when reality inevitably contradicts fantasy. Jung warned that the most dangerous pitfall is conscious unconsciousness, believing you've integrated anima activation while remaining subtly possessed by romantic projections and unconscious patterns. True integration requires ongoing vigilance and the humility to recognize when unconscious patterns are reasserting themselves despite conscious awareness. Jung concluded, the path to conscious love is not linear. It requires persistent self-observation, honest reality testing, and the courage to maintain consciousness, even when unconscious patterns would be more comfortable. Jung's case files document remarkable transformations when men successfully navigate from unconscious anima activation to conscious integrated love. These success stories reveal the profound psychological development possible when romantic feeling becomes a catalyst for individuation rather than regression. Case study: Wilhelm, the conscious professor. Wilhelm, a reserved university philosophy professor, initially sought Jung's help for what he described as paralyzing anxiety that was destroying his academic performance. At 38, Wilhelm had never experienced serious romantic involvement, having devoted his life entirely to intellectual pursuits. Through analysis, Jung discovered Wilhelm's anxiety stemmed from unconscious anima activation around Dr. Helena Müller, a visiting colleague from Vienna. Wilhelm exhibited all 12 unconscious signs: voice mirroring her Austrian inflections, selective hypermemory for her research interests, energy elevation in her presence, while consciously maintaining their relationship was purely professional. Wilhelm's transformation took 2 years of intensive analytic work. Jung guided him through recognizing his anima activation, differentiating between genuine appreciation for Helena and romantic projection, and integrating the emotional depth and creative sensitivity that loving her had awakened. Jung wrote, Wilhelm's anima activation revealed capacities for emotional expressiveness, aesthetic sensitivity, and intuitive understanding that had been completely suppressed by his rational academic persona. Through conscious integration, he became not only capable of love, but a more complete human being. Wilhelm eventually found the courage to express his feelings to Helena with masterful conscious vulnerability. He acknowledged his genuine affection while making clear he had no expectations of reciprocation, valued their professional relationship, and would respect whatever response she chose. Helena was initially surprised but ultimately deeply moved by Wilhelm's authentic honesty and emotional maturity. Their relationship developed slowly into mutual romantic interest based on reality rather than projection. Jung followed their relationship for 15 years. They married after a 2-year courtship, and their partnership became what Jung called individuated love, a relationship that enhanced both partners' individual development while creating profound intimacy. Wilhelm's academic work improved dramatically after conscious anima integration. His philosophy became more creative, emotionally resonant, and humanistically grounded. Helena's presence in his life supported rather than threatened his individual achievement. Jung observed, Wilhelm demonstrated that conscious love multiplies rather than diminishes individual capacity. His relationship enhanced his intellectual work because it was based on mutual support for individuation rather than possessive dependency. Case study: Roberto, the liberated artist. Roberto, a 29-year-old painter, came to Jung suffering from complete creative paralysis. Despite obvious talent, he hadn't completed a single painting in 8 months and was considering abandoning art entirely. Jung discovered Roberto's creative block was linked to unconscious anima activation around Maria, a model who posed for his figure drawing classes. Roberto had become so psychologically possessed by romantic projection that he could no longer paint any woman without seeing Maria's face. Roberto's journey involved recognizing how his unconscious love was creating both inspiration and paralysis. His anima activation had awakened tremendous creative passion, but his inability to consciously integrate these feelings had made painting impossible. Jung wrote, Roberto's artistic gift was actually enhanced by anima activation, but his unconscious handling of romantic projection had trapped him in psychological possession rather than creative flow. Through 18 months of analysis, Roberto learned to differentiate between genuine inspiration and obsessive projection. He developed the capacity to appreciate Maria as a real person while reclaiming his anima-activated creative qualities as his own, rather than dependent on her presence. Roberto's conscious expression of feelings to Maria was a masterpiece of integrated vulnerability. He acknowledged how knowing her had awakened his creative passion while making clear he sought authentic connection rather than romantic fantasy fulfillment. Maria respected Roberto's honesty and emotional maturity. Though she didn't reciprocate romantic interest, their friendship became a source of ongoing creative inspiration based on genuine appreciation rather than possessive projection. Roberto's artistic breakthrough was dramatic. Within 6 months of conscious anima integration, he completed a series of paintings that Jung described as combining emotional depth with technical mastery in ways that his pre-integration work had never achieved. Jung noted, Roberto's creative capacity had been enhanced rather than threatened by anima activation. Once he learned to love consciously, his art became a vehicle for expressing the emotional depth and feminine sensitivity that loving Maria had awakened. Roberto eventually married Elena, a writer he met 2 years later. Their relationship demonstrated conscious love principles, mutual support for individual creative development, combined with genuine intimacy based on authentic appreciation rather than anima-animus projection. The integrated lover archetype. Jung's successful cases shared common characteristics that he identified as markers of conscious masculine love. Masculine emotional intelligence, the capacity to be vulnerable and expressive without losing strength, boundaries, or individual identity. These men could feel deeply and communicate authentically while maintaining psychological sovereignty. Reality-based love, the ability to love actual people rather than projected anima ideals. They developed appreciation for women's genuine qualities while releasing fantasy-based romantic projections. Individual enhancement, romantic relationships that supported rather than threatened personal development. Their love increased individual capacity rather than creating dependency or identity fusion. Conscious vulnerability, the courage to express feelings authentically while accepting all possible outcomes. They could risk rejection without becoming manipulative or controlling. Anima integration, incorporation of feminine qualities, emotional depth, creative sensitivity, intuitive understanding into conscious personality rather than seeking these qualities through romantic projection. Jung observed that integrated lovers often became powerful models for other men, demonstrating how romantic love could catalyze psychological growth rather than creating regression or possession. Their relationships tended to be characterized by what Jung called mutual individuation support, partnerships that enhanced both partners' personal development while creating genuine intimacy based on conscious choice rather than unconscious need. Jung wrote, "The integrated lover represents one of the highest achievements of masculine psychological development, the capacity to love deeply while remaining individually sovereign, to feel profoundly while maintaining conscious choice, and to create authentic intimacy without sacrificing personal growth." These men had transformed the curse of anima possession into the gift of conscious love, demonstrating that romantic feeling could become a vehicle for the deepest human psychological development rather than a source of possession and suffering. Jung concluded, "Every man who learns to love consciously contributes to the healing of the collective masculine wound and creates possibilities for authentic partnership that supports mutual psychological evolution." Jung believed that men learning to recognize and integrate unconscious love patterns serves a crucial function in healing what he called the wounded masculine heart, widespread emotional disconnection, and inability to love authentically that creates dysfunction in relationships, families, and society. Jung wrote, "The epidemic of failed relationships, emotional unavailability, and masculine psychological isolation stems largely from men's unconsciousness around anima activation and romantic projection. When men cannot recognize their own feelings, they cannot communicate them authentically." Jung observed that unconscious masculine love patterns contribute to a cascade of social dysfunction. Men who remain unconscious of their romantic feelings often become emotionally manipulative, controlling, or completely withdrawn, creating confusion and pain for their partners while remaining mystified by their own behavior. The collective masculine wound. Jung identified what he called collective masculine emotional amputation, the widespread suppression of anima qualities that leaves men disconnected from their capacity for emotional depth, intuitive understanding, and authentic vulnerability. Modern masculine development, Jung observed, emphasizes rational thinking and emotional control at the expense of feeling capacity and relational intelligence. This creates men who are professionally competent but emotionally crippled. This collective wound manifests in several destructive patterns: men who unconsciously project feminine qualities onto women while remaining disconnected from their own emotional capacity, creating relationships based on complementary neediness rather than individual wholeness. Romantic relationships that become psychological battlegrounds, where unconscious animus projections create conflict, manipulation, and mutual possession rather than conscious love and mutual support. Generational transmission of unconscious love patterns, where fathers who never learned conscious emotional expression raise sons equally disconnected from their capacity for authentic romantic feeling. Jung noted, "Every man who remains unconscious of his anima activation perpetuates the collective masculine emotional wound, creating ripple effects that damage relationships across generations." Agents of transformation. When men develop consciousness around anima activation and romantic feeling, they become what Jung called agents of collective healing, individuals whose personal integration work contributes to broader social transformation. Jung wrote, "Every man who learns to love consciously makes it slightly easier for other men to access their own emotional depth and authentic romantic expression. Consciousness spreads through modeling and permission-giving." Men who achieve conscious love integration serve multiple transformative functions. They demonstrate to other men that emotional vulnerability and romantic expressiveness are compatible with masculine strength and individual identity. They create healthier relationship dynamics that inspire other couples toward greater consciousness and authentic connection. They raise children who grow up witnessing conscious masculine emotional expression, breaking generational patterns of unconscious projection and emotional unavailability. They contribute to workplace and social environments where emotional intelligence and authentic relationship skills are valued rather than suppressed. Jung observed, men who integrate their anima activation become living examples that masculine strength and emotional depth can coexist, challenging collective assumptions about gender and psychological development. Societal evolution. Jung envisioned broader social healing when masculine anima integration becomes more widespread, creating what he called conscious partnership culture that could transform human relationships at every level. When men learn to integrate their own feminine qualities rather than projecting them onto women, Jung wrote, relationships become based on mutual wholeness rather than complementary neediness. This creates partnerships that support individual development rather than limiting it. Jung believed this transformation was essential for humanity's psychological evolution. He observed that most social dysfunction stems from unconscious anima-animus projection patterns that create conflict, possession, and mutual manipulation rather than conscious love and authentic support. The broader healing occurs through several interconnected processes. Relationship transformation. When men develop love consciousness, their partnerships become based on conscious choice rather than unconscious projection, creating healthier relationship models for others to observe and emulate. Family healing. Children raised by consciously loving parents develop emotional intelligence and relationship skills that break generational patterns of unconscious projection and emotional dysfunction. Workplace evolution. Men who integrate anima qualities bring emotional intelligence, collaborative capacity, and authentic communication skills into professional environments, transforming work culture toward greater humanity and effectiveness. Cultural shift. Societies where men access their full emotional and relational capacity become more balanced, creative, and psychologically healthy, moving beyond rigid gender roles toward integrated human development. Jung wrote, the healing of the masculine heart through conscious anima integration represents one of the most important psychological tasks of our time. Individual men's personal work becomes service to collective human evolution. Breaking the cycle. Jung emphasized that men who remain unconscious of their love patterns perpetuate cycles of emotional dysfunction that extend far beyond their individual relationships. Unconscious masculine love creates confusion, manipulation, and pain for women, while leaving men isolated and emotionally stunted, Jung observed. These patterns repeat across generations until consciousness intervenes to break the cycle. Jung documented how unconscious love patterns create specific forms of relationship dysfunction. Women who become exhausted by men's emotional unavailability or confusing mixed signals stemming from unconscious romantic projection. Children who grow up witnessing inauthentic relationship dynamics and develop their own patterns of unconscious projection and emotional disconnection. Social environments where authentic emotional expression is suppressed in favor of performance, manipulation, or complete withdrawal from relationship intimacy. Communities where gender roles become rigid defenses against the vulnerability required for genuine psychological development and authentic partnership. Jung noted, every man who develops love consciousness contributes to breaking these destructive cycles and creating possibilities for authentic human connection. The ripple effect. Jung observed that conscious masculine love development creates expanding circles of positive influence that extend far beyond individual relationships. Men who integrate anima activation become mentors and models for other men struggling with emotional availability and authentic relationship skills. Their partnerships demonstrate possibilities for conscious love that inspire other couples toward greater awareness and genuine connection. Their children develop emotional intelligence and relationship skills that represent evolutionary advancement in human psychological development. Their professional and social interactions reflect integrated masculine qualities that contribute to more balanced and humane community dynamics. Jung wrote, "Personal psychological work becomes collective service when individuals achieve consciousness that was previously unconscious. Every integrated man contributes to the healing of the collective masculine wound." Evolutionary necessity. Jung believed that masculine anima integration represents not just personal development opportunity, but evolutionary necessity for human survival and thriving. The challenges facing humanity require both masculine and feminine psychological capacities working in conscious integration, Jung observed. Men who remain disconnected from their anima qualities cannot contribute fully to solving problems that require emotional intelligence, collaborative capacity, and holistic understanding. Jung saw conscious masculine love as essential for creating sustainable relationships, healthy families, effective communities, and balanced societies capable of addressing complex challenges through integrated human wisdom. The collective importance extends beyond individual happiness to species-level psychological evolution that Jung believed was necessary for human flourishing in increasingly complex and interconnected world conditions. Jung concluded, men's journey from unconscious anima activation to conscious love integration represents both personal healing and collective service. Individual transformation becomes gift to humanity's psychological evolution. If you recognize these quiet signs of unconscious love in yourself, Jung would say your anima is awakening to guide you toward one of the most profound psychological transformations available to men, the evolution from emotional unconsciousness to conscious love capacity. The signs aren't problems to solve, but invitations to psychological wholeness. Your voice mirroring her speech patterns, your selective hypermemory for her details, your energy coordination with her presence. These are your unconscious announcing its readiness for the deeper work of individuation through romantic feeling. Jung wrote, "The man who recognizes anima activation has reached the threshold of profound psychological development. He can choose consciousness over possession, integration over projection, authentic love over desperate neediness." This recognition places you at a crucial decision point. You can retreat into unconscious denial, remaining trapped in the anxiety and confusion of unacknowledged romantic feeling. You can become possessed by anima projection, losing yourself in fantasy and manipulation. Or you can embrace Jung's challenge, conscious integration of your anima activation. The path of conscious love. Jung's invitation is to move beyond unconscious romantic possession toward what he called individuated love, the capacity to feel deeply while maintaining psychological sovereignty, to love authentically while respecting individual boundaries, to experience profound romantic connection while supporting mutual growth. This path requires what Jung termed masculine courage, the willingness to feel vulnerable emotions while maintaining inner strength, to risk rejection while preserving self-respect, to love openly while accepting all possible outcomes. Jung emphasized, the journey from unconscious to conscious love isn't just personal development, it's participation in the healing of the collective masculine heart and the creation of relationship possibilities that support human psychological evolution. Your recognition of unconscious love signs means you're ready to begin this transformative work. Acknowledge your romantic feelings honestly, without shame or rationalization. Your anima activation is natural and meaningful, a call towards psychological integration and emotional maturation. Differentiate between genuine appreciation for the actual woman and anima projection of your unconscious feminine ideal. Learn to love the real person rather than your romantic fantasy. Integrate the qualities her presence has awakened: emotional depth, creative sensitivity, intuitive understanding, as developments in your own personality rather than projections to be sought through romantic possession. Express your feelings authentically when appropriate, with conscious vulnerability that comes from strength rather than neediness, respecting both your truth and her autonomy. Accept whatever outcome emerges, knowing that conscious love, expressed authentically, serves individuation, regardless of reciprocation or relationship development. Jung's challenge to you. Jung believed that men capable of recognizing unconscious love signs possess exceptional psychological sensitivity and capacity for emotional intelligence that represents evolutionary advancement in masculine development. The man who can perceive anima activation, Jung wrote, possesses psychological awareness that most men lack entirely. This sensitivity is not weakness, but sophisticated emotional intelligence that can become a gift to relationships and society. Your ability to recognize these subtle signs indicates readiness for psychological development that many men never achieve. Jung saw this as both privilege and responsibility, an opportunity to model conscious masculine love for other men trapped in emotional unconsciousness. Jung's final challenge: transform your unconscious love activation into conscious relationship capacity that serves not only your individual development, but the collective healing of masculine emotional dysfunction. The collective mission. Jung believed that men who learn conscious love become agents of social transformation, demonstrating possibilities for authentic masculine emotional expression that heal generational wounds and create healthier relationship models. Every man who integrates anima activation, Jung observed, makes it easier for other men to access their emotional depth and authentic relationship capacity. Individual consciousness becomes collective service. Your journey from unconscious romantic signs to conscious love integration isn't just personal growth. It's participation in what Jung saw as essential human psychological evolution, the development of masculine capacity for emotional intelligence, authentic vulnerability, and conscious relationship skills. The ultimate empowerment. Jung's most empowering insight. The very sensitivity that allows you to recognize unconscious love signs represents sophisticated psychological awareness that can become your greatest strength in relationships and life. Men who develop conscious love capacity become attractive not through manipulation or performance, but through authentic emotional availability and individual psychological wholeness. They create relationships based on mutual choice rather than unconscious projection, conscious appreciation rather than desperate neediness, individual strength rather than codependent fusion. Jung wrote, "The conscious lover represents the pinnacle of masculine psychological development, deep feeling capacity combined with individual sovereignty, authentic vulnerability balanced with personal strength, genuine intimacy that enhances rather than diminishes individual growth." Your next step. The quiet signs of love you've recognized are actually loud calls from your unconscious toward greater psychological wholeness and authentic relationship capacity. Jung's invitation: begin the conscious integration work that transforms unconscious romantic possession into the gift of individuated love, the capacity to love deeply while remaining true to your individual path of development. This isn't about getting the girl, it's about becoming the man capable of conscious love, authentic vulnerability, and psychological wholeness that represents the highest achievement of masculine emotional development. Jung concluded, love consciously felt and authentically expressed becomes one of the most powerful catalysts for individuation, personal growth, and the creation of relationships that support rather than limit human psychological potential. The quiet signs of love are invitations to join the ranks of men healing the collective masculine heart through conscious emotional development and authentic relationship capacity. Which type of unconscious lover do you recognize yourself as? Comment below and let me know what resonates most with your experience. Subscribe to join the community of men walking the path toward conscious love and authentic emotional development. Next week, we'll explore Jung's secret techniques for integrating shadow projections in romantic relationships, the hidden patterns that destroy love before it begins.